Alright, what is up guys? So this is going to be more of a yapping video than the ones I've been doing recently. I've been doing a lot of gameplay stuff recently. But with that being said, this is going to be a video definitely catered towards new fighters rather than, the more experienced ones. While anybody will be able to gain stuff from this, like I said, this is going to be much more towards the people that are either, new to the game or new to fighter in general and are trying to get into it. And I compiled a few things, like a list of a few things that I think are what I would consider the basics of fighter. And like I will say, like this is not everything. This is just a few things off the top of my head that I think are very very important that fighter players should know. I mean, I think this is a good thing that's like to start learning as you're playing, but this is something that you should know as you're gonna play fighter. Because some of these, while they are not fighter specific, they are still very very important, like such as positioning. But yeah, I will get into that in little bits. So, to start off with, one of the most important things as a fighter player is to know your role. And if you're in solos, then this isn't as important because obviously, you don't have teammates to like play around or, do other things around. Your role is just always going to be the same thing. You're playing selfish, so this isn't as important for solos, but for duos and trios, this is way more important. And what do I mean by knowing your role? Well, there are some times when the way you're playing or like the build you have, it has to be played a certain way. And what that means is if you are playing a full tank build, like builds I normally play, you are not the star player. You're not the main character on your team. You are not the one there to do the damage. More often than not, what you're going to be doing is just making space, being a tank, which goes into our next thing of positioning, but I'm going to go into this a little bit more. And I feel like this is something a lot of people struggle with. And if you don't really know your identity in a team, it's kind of going to throw you off because you're just not really going to know what to do in general. Knowing your role is one of the most core things to understand when you're going into playing a game in a team setting. And this obviously extends past Dark and Darker. This works for everything. In MOBAs, this is obviously a really, really big thing if any of you have ever played MOBAs. Regardless of the role you play, like the specific, I mean, like I don't mean like, top lane, mid, any of that. Like regardless of like the role you're playing, the character within that role, they have different things they do, right? Like it's like playing a tank versus playing, a bruiser or playing a peel character versus an initiator. It's that type of thing. And learning this is very, very important. And what it comes down to, like obviously it's going to change depending on your team comp or the build you play, like I said. So really the way to find out is just, talk to your teammates, see what you guys think works best for you or what you think you're best at. That's something else. Is you don't have to play or like playing around your team is fine to an extent, but if you're putting yourselves in a spot where you feel like you are not doing as much as you could, if you are in another position, or you just don't think it fits right for your team, then speak out about it. Try to like change it. If you're not a tank player and you're more of a like a fast backline diver, that type of thing, then build around that and have your teammates understand that and try to build your team comp around that. Like that's not my playstyle, so I don't do that, and I understand that I am a space creator and a tank. That is like the identity that I take on in the game and pretty much any game that I play. So moving on to the next thing, positioning. Positioning is something that is incredibly important for fighter in particular. Now I will say, I should have said this at the start of the video, but a lot of people look at fighter and they say, fighter takes no skill, easiest class in the game, yada yada, all this random shit. And fighter, yes, is incredibly simple. However, simple does not mean easy. And a lot of people get lost in this. And I will say this right now if you guys don't know. Fighter at the high level of gameplay, so like HR Trios, for example, that's what I'll say. At the high level of gameplay is one of these least represented classes, and you will almost never see fighters. And like this is across almost all metas, especially right now that we're in a meta that's dominated by wizards. But in previous meta with clerics, before that, and right after that, this patch before wizards really buffed, fighters were almost never played. I would run into a fighter another like once every few games, and that's talking about actual geared players. At the low level, the casual level, or like 124 gear score, that type of thing, fighter is incredibly common because that's where people down there. Not to say they aren't good, but they're not necessarily as experienced, and they can't exploit the weaknesses that fighter has. And moving into positioning, I'm going to talk about one of the largest weaknesses of fighter, and that is their lack of mobility. Yes, sprint does exist. However, that is a 6-second ability that gives you not that much movement speed. For 2 seconds you have 45, 2 seconds you have 30, and 2 seconds you have 15. And truthfully speaking, even with the 2 seconds 45 move speed, you're still relatively slow, especially if your weapon's out. because a lot of the weapons fighter uses are very heavy. Heater shield's 20, falchion's 25, arming sword's 20. You know, that's with your weapons out, that's minus 40 movement speed penalty at least. And even if you're running, like, you know, let's say hypothetically you're running a 300 move speed kit, if you have falchion heater, the first 2 seconds of sprint are only covering the move speed that you have with your weapons out, so you're still only 300 move speed. You're still not going to catch that many people. But now let's move on to say, you know, you're trying to initiate a fight. Well, how do you get in? Your only way, because you don't have a gap closer, is to walk in. And that's, you know, if you do that, I have a point that's going to talk about that in a bit. But that's if you decide to move into the fight, your best way of doing it is using sprint, assuming you're running that skill. Obviously, I don't, but, you know, that's neither here nor there. That's something I can mention in a bit. So, if you sprint into a fight, like let's say you're playing a mobility kit for whatever reason, or you're just, you know, just playing a normal fighter build and you have sprint. If you sprint into a fight, now, all of a sudden, you know, and they back off, or, you know, you sprinted on 2 and there was a 3rd or something, like all of these random things that could happen, that do happen quite often. You do this, and now your team needs you to go back, but you don't have a mobility, so you're really slow to move back. By the time you get back, one of your teammates is already dead. And Fighter is one of the most reliant, team-reliant characters. You need your teammates to do so much for you because Fighter has so many weaknesses that characters can exploit. Like you're seeing on the screen here, look at this Warlock. Bro, I had no... Literally, this guy just runs away from me. I can't do anything. Assuming this guy's a melee build. If he was a caster, right now, he doesn't even have to run from me. He just kites me casting spells. And I can't ever do anything to him. I would need my wizard, who's on the team with me, obviously, to be the one to do anything. That's how Fighter works. That's Fighter in a trio setting. That is the best part about Fighter in trios, is that your teammates can make up for your weaknesses. So, moving back to positioning, like I said, you have to be very, very careful with where you position, because if you mess up even slightly, it could cost your entire team a fight. Like I said, if you're too far forward, too far back, you know, you block your teammates' LOS, you block your teammates... you know, like, or LOS from healing, or like, you know, you block your wizard from throwing spells, you're behind the wizard so he can't kite out. All of these things could cause really, really big losses in a fight, and it's not, like, that absurd to think that it's going to happen. But, something other than that that's really, really important is when you're playing with a cleric, because cleric is the fighter's best friend, that's just how it always has been. Cleric is fighter's best friend. When you're playing with a cleric, you never want to make it hard for your cleric to heal you. If you do this, what's going to end up happening is there are going to be times when you're just out of LOS from your cleric and then he can't heal you and then you just die. Yes, you have Second Wind, and Second Wind, you know, is healing, but it's not super fast, right? It's 40% over 12 seconds. That is not like a lesser heal or a holy light in the moment. It's not a burst heal. It's going to heal you during the duration of a fight, but if, you know, you get closed off, locked behind a wall, you know, Fighter gets around you, Barb gets around you, Bard gets around you, they're blocking the LOS from your healer, it is very, very easy for you to drop very, very fast. This is, I know, if you watch my recent video that I posted, there's a clip of me fighting a Bard team in there. I move around the Bard, get behind him, and I cut off the line of sight between him and his cleric, so his cleric can't heal him anymore. And eventually we do kill him, but that is a very, very common tactic that fighters use, either against other fighters or just against people in general. Because you are a tanky class, you use your health pool as a resource to get in between teams to cut off the LOS of healing. So you have to be very, very sure to know that that is not going to happen to you. Other than that, like, positioning is something I could sit here and I could talk about for, you know, an hour, right? But at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's something that you have to get out there and experience for yourself. You know, me pulling up clips isn't gonna, and like trying to explain my positioning isn't really gonna help you guys. It's best if you just try to keep in mind the things I'm saying, and then whenever you're, the next time you're playing, just try to bring those things back and think about what you're doing. That is something else that that wasn't on my list, but that's something important, and this works for everybody, is never just do something. Always be consciously thinking about the actions you are taking. You always want to be doing that. Never just, you know, spur of the moment do something. Like engaging, disengaging, you know, picking a fight, you know, swapping weapons, any of these things. Never just do them. Always think about the act you're taking and make sure it is the correct thing to do. That is what I will recommend. Because a lot of players, what they will do is they will just do things. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize what's got the screen hidden. Let me fix that for you guys really quick. All right. And there you guys go. Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. A lot of players will kind of just do things, and you ask them after, like, "Hey, why'd you do that?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." I've seen this happen in a lot of players. I don't mean just like low tier players. I've seen a lot of really, really good players just kind of act without thinking, and they end up making the wrong play, and it can cost the entire team fight. And as the front line, you are kind of the heart of the team. Like, yes, a lot of people are like, oh, the cleric heals you, he's the heart of the team. But if the cleric has no one to stand in front of him, people can just run at him and kill him, right? He can't do his job. You are there to anchor the team. You try to keep people off. You try to make space for your teammates to play. You have to do so many different things that it can get a little overwhelming in trios to an extent. Like Fighter, like I said, yes, Fighter is a very, very simple class at its core, but just because it's simple, it does not mean it's easy. You have a lot of responsibility even in the simple class. Now, moving on from positioning, something else that's very, very important is you need to know what fights to take. This applies to not just, trios, solos, duos, everything. There are a lot of instances where I've seen people, one of the biggest mistakes people make, especially for new players, is, they'll say, like, oh, I just feel like I'm losing fights, like I can't win fights. And then you look at their gameplay and they're almost always taking bad fights. What does this mean? This means, they have PvE on them. They're in a bad position. They could get third-partied. They don't have cooldowns up. They don't have their second wind. They're not full health. They didn't use pots and the other guy did. They didn't get poked beforehand. All of these things are things you have to consider when you're going to take a fight. And I don't want to talk too much on the range, like, getting poke off, because that's my next point I'm going to go on. So just to start off is before, sometimes you have no choice, right? Sometimes when a fight just comes to you and you have to, like, make the best of it, that's part of games like this. You get third-partied, things happen. That is not something that you can look back on and necessarily be like, we could have done this better. There will be times where, you could be like, oh, we played this poorly, we put ourselves in a position to be third-partied, that type of thing. But that's something else that I'm not going to get too far into right now, because, that kind of plays into positioning, which I just mentioned. But knowing where you are on the map is something that's very, very important. Not just, based on module by module, but the map as a whole. Are you in a hot spot that people show up to? That's something you want to consider. For example, on this layout we have right now, the top left of this map, where you have library that meets the hallway, pyramid, and that little top left cubby with the two bridges, that is one of the most popular areas on the map. You almost never want to fight there early on, because there will almost always be a third party. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and then I immediately started talking about getting third partied. But you just have to be very, very careful. And this is where, sometimes you want to take strategic points, like high ground, for example, like on top of library. And yes, I know sitting there all game is very, very cringe. However, technically speaking, it is usually the correct way to play. And, excuse me, and you don't have to sit there the whole game, obviously. Sometimes just sitting there long enough to let either other teams fight or put yourself in the spot where you can be the third party instead of being the one getting third partied is very, very good, because then, you show up, clean two teams up, super easy overall. But other than that, like I said, there are a lot of different things to consider. Mobs are one of the biggest ones. I see a lot of players take fights around mobs, whether, they accidentally pulled them or they were already pulled and they start trying to fight someone, and then you get griefed by mobs in the middle of the fight. I mean, this happens even to the most experienced players if you're not careful. It is very, very easy to pull one skeleton archer, one melee, and they show up at the middle of the fight, and they hit you once or twice, and, if you're a squishy, that's half your health bar. Even if you're a fighter, you don't want to be taking free damage. And then you have to consider things like characters that maximize their potential when they have other mobs around. Think of, you pull a skeleton and you're trying to run away and they're fighting a wizard. The wizard now has a free target to chain lightning your entire team that is not going to avoid them. I've been in that situation many, many times, and sometimes, your best plays, instead of running away, you have to stop and kill that skeleton really fast before you get the chance to, or otherwise your team is going to take 3 chain lightnings while you're trying to run. And even if it doesn't kill you, you're going to be running down, a sank or two, and that's just not something you want. Then, moving on, we now have ranged versus melee. This is something that I feel like a lot of players struggle with, because whether it's, they just don't want to, or they just don't do it. You always bring a ranged weapon. That is just a fact, right? Always have a ranged weapon, but there's no use of having the ranged weapon if you're not going to use it. And that's where a lot of players kind of fall short. A lot of people are just like, oh, I just want to go into melee. I just want to have a melee fight. And yeah, don't get me wrong, it's really fun. But sometimes using range is just your best option. I have a lot of people, a lot of new fighter players, they come and ask me like, hey, how do I deal with wizards? How do I deal with warlocks? Well, the best way to do it is to use a ranged weapon. Longbow, survival bow, recurve, crossbow, any of those are good. Like, some are better, but they're all like good. Because these characters you just cannot W key on at full HP. especially with them being as high move speed as they are. You have to get some poke out before. You have to make them panic. You can't just let them exist full HP because otherwise you're just going to lose that fight. If you never go for these ranged hits, you are just not going to win the fight unless they play incredibly bad. Even for melee fights, ranged poke is one of the best things you can get off before you get in the fight because, you can make people waste prop pots, make them waste cooldowns, all these other things, or you catch them healing so, you can get in. Like, let's say they have their weapon out, you pull out your crossbow, get a quick shot, they try to back off to pop a prop pot or pop a health pot, you sprint in that small gap and you can maybe get a free hit in before they get their weapon out. I've done this many, many times. This is something that's very, very common. Like, you don't have to sit there necessarily and just permanently shoot them with a ranged weapon, because don't get me wrong, that's incredibly boring, even if it necessarily is the correct play. But getting some ranged poke out before is always beneficial to you. Literally always. So that is definitely something that people need to consider more, is just make use of the ranged weapon you have. Like I said, if you're using like a crossbow, you don't have to sit there shoot, reload, shoot, reload, shoot, reload. If it's nothing else but, just popping it for a quick second before the person gets like in range of you, like let's say they pop a prop pot and you shoot them with a crossbow as they're getting in, you swap back to your melee weapon like really quick like that. That's a prop pot gone. That's 30 damage that they aren't going to be able to like deal with. That's effectively, however much your thing does, you break the prop pot, that's like 25, 30 damage that's gone right there. And if they want to pop another one, they have to back off, reapply. You have yours popped, you're at a big advantage there. That's a hit advantage for free basically. And then moving on to the last thing. So Fighter, the core of Fighter, what it is it is a class about blocking, right? Fighter, that is what Fighter is. This class it's a shield class, and that is where that's where, like, if you make use of the shield, that is like the best thing you can do. Also, I forgot I died here. Wait, do I die here? I'm trying to think. I don't know. I was getting like sidetracked. But do I? No, I don't die here. But I'm sorry. I was getting sidetracked watching the fight that was happening. I couldn't remember if this is where I died or not. But yeah, Fighter is a class that uses shield the best. You have shield perks, barricade, shield mastery, counterattack. All of these give you very, very big benefits to the way you play. Counterattack is one of the best hybrid perks in the game in terms of defense and offense. It lets you chase people down. It lets you run away. It gives you good mid-fight stats on the action speed and move speed. It's just fantastic. And the thing is, the best part about counterattack is something that you don't constantly have to apply. You get one block off, you have at least a 3-second window now where you have these stat buffs that you can just swing if you want to, or you can run at somebody and chase them down. That is what makes counterattack so good for chasing people, like for chasing like rangers and wizards and stuff, is you block a projectile and now you're 10% faster. It's fantastic. Then other than that, Shield Mastery is a very good offensive perk. If you watch my most recent video on Arming Sword, if you haven't, you should go check that out. And there I show you how to make use of Shield Mastery most effectively with, block hitting because of how it works. And then after that, Barricade, which is the best defensive perk in the game, almost. Few things, Iron Will, what's it called? Iron Will and Anti-Magic, Robust, all the things. But other than those, it is the best defensive perk in the game. Literally, when you're blocking, you get 50 armor, 50 MR, just 50 free stats. That's effectively equipping another Dark Plate and, like another Hound Skull, basically. It's so many free stats. And the best part for those is they work against all damage because it's physical and, it's armor and MR. And then you don't have to worry about, blocking things like AoE damage, like fireballs, because that's just free damage that you're getting reduced from that. Normally, it doesn't matter if you block, you still take the full damage. But even if you get splashed, they hit your shield and you still do damage, you take less. Really, really good. And it's really nice for getting high MR. It's one of the best ways to get it because MR is relatively difficult to build. So Barricade ends up giving you like 2 items worth of MR. But other than that, something that I think is very, very core for new fighter players to learn is how to, like, not even just like, make using a perk, how to make use of perks, specifically just how to block. Because even when it comes to PvE, if you are able to block them, that's less damage they're going to do to you. That's more HP you have in a fight. Because something a lot of players struggle with early on in Dark and Darker is how to clear mobs effectively. And Fighter has one of the best tools in a shield that allows you to do it. It's so easy to block mobs. There are only a few mobs that are even remotely difficult to block to begin with. And that's, things like the the axe skeletons, right? those are pretty much the only mob that's even remotely difficult to block outside of things like ice caves mobs, but not talking about there. I'm just really talking about crypts. Even goblin caves are relatively easy. But if you learn how to block these mobs, like I said, that is pretty much just gonna like slingshot you straight past having to deal with PvE and moving on directly to being able to worry about PvP more, which is something, like I said, a lot of players struggle with. A lot of players literally don't live past the PvE to make it to the PvP. And Fighter, like I said, has the best tool to deal with PvE. So Fighter has such an easy time starting the game. And the best part is being able to block the mobs makes your clear faster, because a lot of classes, which is do the bait and attack, back up, wait for it, then swing. Fighter doesn't do that. Fighter interrupts them halfway and then gets to swing in. And you can do this over and over and over for literally every mob in the game. And it's just great. Other than that, learning how to block in PvP is also incredibly effective, because there are a lot of things that you need to block as a fighter. Specifically right now, you have things like Reckless Attack, Barbarians in the meta, that if you do not know how to block and you fight them, they can one-tap you. Like, if they headshot you with a Reckless, double axe, they will almost always one-shot you if they have the build, because they have 100% armor pen and they hit for like 180 damage. It is absolutely absurd, but the best way to counter that, they come to block. Then you have things like Achilles, Blow of Corruption, all Smite, a Clerics, all of these other things that your shield that would normally pretty much cook you, you can actually beat because you're blocking them. Other than that, though, there's not a lot of things. Like, obviously, this isn't a full list of everything you should know as a fighter, but I think these are some that are deceptively simple that are definitely good to keep in mind. Like I said, obviously, just because I went over these, you're not now automatically going to be a great player, right? Like, that's just not the case. But these are things, the way I think of these videos is it's like you're sitting in a lecture and I am giving this information, and it's now your choice to go, put it into practice, study it more, whatever you want to do, right? And if you do that, I genuinely do think it will make you a better player. I think with just these, 5 things that I've covered, these 5 topics, I think these can literally jump you from brand new player to at least a medium level player. Medium to the top if you know you're not great at them. But if you, like I said, if you implement these into your gameplay, even slightly, for trios, duos, solos, whatever, you are going to see tangible benefits. You are going to start winning more fights, dying less, and that's what the game's all about, right? Like, everybody, you want to extract more, you want to die less. So, with that being said, that's gonna wrap it up for me. Thank you guys for watching. It was a good little video, and I hope you guys enjoy. Catch you guys next time. Peace.